Well, welcome everybody to webinar 10 in the ACITI webinar series on paperless trade and how we move forward with modernisation of trading systems for Australia. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest from the United States Customs and Border Protection, Vincent Annunziato, who is the Director of Business Transformation and Innovation Division in that agency. And he oversees technology and software changes and enhancements to improve the operational environment for customs and border protection. He's got a focus on future technology trends to help the agency adopt and prepare for disruptive technology. And they utilise fail and fast methodologies to bring low-cost, high-impact testing of executive management to order and improve the success of agency investments. Further than that, he's got a long history with US Customs and Border Protections. His whole career has been there, and he's been involved with a whole range of earlier roles where he's led the modernisation of the US Customs automated commercial environment, the ACE system, and he's been responsible for business requirements and process flows related to managing all sizes of large government IT projects related to importing and exporting in the United States. And we're really pleased to have this discussion with him today. As usual, we're recording this session. We welcome our guests. We will have the usual Q&A process. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen on the taskbar there. But without further ado, Vinny, I'd like to hand over to you to give any words of welcome that you'd like to, and then start your presentation, run through that, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards.
All right, absolutely, and thank you, Bryan and ACITI, for bringing me in to talk about what we're doing in innovation. I will tell you that I feel like I'm a kid in a candy shop, having the ability to test out new technologies and see where they're going to lead the agency. And as you said, Bryan, it really comes down to, and as an innovation professional, what we're ultimately doing is leading the agency into making further investments into products and projects that can help us modernize and do our business better. So I'm going to be covering how the U.S. is making advancements. I'll be tying it into projects that we have already accomplished, and then those things that we're moving into. So you'll get a full breadth of what we're doing. So I'm going to share our screen. Just make sure that this is coming up properly. And do you see it, Bryan?
Yes, that's there, full screen. Terrific.
All right, great. So I like to start off with a little anecdotal piece. So if any of you have seen me guest speaking on this stuff before, I like to use this one little story to kind of summarize the customs business. And what you're seeing up here is a slide that is depicting one of the problem areas for, I would say, just about every customs organization in the globe. And that is that we have a blind spot in the first third of the supply chain and what's happening. So recently, I had been watching a documentary. It was talking about a major internet provider that sold some goods to a young lady, right? Nothing out of the ordinary. And the first person that they come to is this, she's got to be about 17 years old. This young lady, 17 years old, nondescript. Like if you were to see her on the street, you're not even thinking to yourself, this is anybody that I would really know. Well, you come to find out she's an internet influencer and she has 1.5 million followers. And her specialty is makeup. So they flip over to this other young lady, probably just as nondescript, about the same age. And she's one of the followers. And what had happened was the person who was the internet influencer said, there is this lipstick and you have got to get this. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Here I am dating myself with that expression, but this is like a really good product and you've got to get this. So of course, this other young lady that they have on did so. And she did what most people do. Most normal humans do, right? They look for the cheapest product they can find on the internet site, and she orders it. And when the product arrives, obviously she opens up the box and excitedly goes to the mirror to apply it. And Bryan, what do you think happens? She winds up super gluing her lips together. All right. Now, I bring this story up because it really hits home about how difficult a mission that we all have. And that is, how do we find that lipstick in the haystack, right? We have companies and governments trying to stop nefarious activity. And how do we go about that? And that's what I'm going to present to you today, because a lot of the upgrades that I think that we're doing in our technology are going to help that. And one other side note, I am a business person. I am not a technical person. I know enough to be dangerous with technical. I can argue with a chief architect, but I don't know how to code or anything like that. So I will be taking this from the business perspective and trying to make this as understandable as possible to the audience. All right. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history. I'm going to run quickly through a couple of other slides because I don't want to spend too much time on them and move you more into the guidelines of what we have going on today. But in the beginning, around 2018, I had originally built the single window that's really my claim to fame in U.S. Customs. I was in between about 49 agencies, and we were able to build that as well as the entry system that we currently have today. So when I came on board in 2018 and I started to take over innovation, we really didn't have much direction. And I got pulled into a bunch of meetings and I started hearing about this thing called blockchain. The problem that I had is my sixth sense goes off as soon as somebody starts telling me that there's a technology out there that it could solve world hunger and world peace. It was like this greatest thing that you've ever seen. And I thought to myself, I have to be hesitant because I have, when you work in my industry, you realize that when people say all you have to do are just, or it's simple, you cringe because, one change on a data element with a system our size could mean millions of dollars worth of work because that can be transposed into multiple databases and there's all sorts of things that have to be done. So we never look for the easy way out. And certainly if something is bright and shiny, I'm not attracted to it until I can test it out. And we're a testing organization. So I had to really get through the hype and understand what blockchain was and what its viability was. And we did a small proof of concept, which actually we did quite well with. We were able to do a couple of things that did fantastic, actually. We tested the free trade agreements with the trade. We were making it a lot simpler. We were able to do things that were pre-arrival that we normally weren't able to do. And then we did a great piece with the intellectual property rights where we were actually able to use a licensed organization that granted licenses. And we were able to determine who actually owned the license. Was it the importer, the retailer, or the manufacturer? And right now on our entry system, you can't do that. You can only know that at the import, you only know that it's the importer, and then somebody has to read that license and we don't know who it's given to. So these all went very well, but there were some issues that we were running into. I was interested in understanding some of these terms. Like blockchain brought about things like trust and immutability, and trust wasn't really trust like I trust that Bryan is hosting this show today, or I trust my kids to sometimes do the right thing, right? We were talking about trust being understanding that a system was identified and that system was always sending that data, but we wanted something more. We really, we had saw some potential in the tracking, which was really very viable. In fact, being able to follow things in from origin was really good. So that we liked. And then really something that really turned for me when I started to study the use of blockchain was really group input, or what one of my friends, Dale Christie from FedEx, says. He calls it the team sport of data. And I like that term because really now what you're starting to look at is breaking out into individual traditional as well as non-traditional actors submitting data and being held accountable for that. But we in saying all of this, with the blockchain, we ran into a couple of issues. For instance, we weren't so interested in having a government system that needed consensus to prove that something was valuable. We saw no need for that. We had seen a couple of things where, for the size of our system, we would be worried about handling the amount of data that was coming in and those structures. We felt that the blockchain hadn't really proved itself in that area, and the costliness, especially up front, of building such a system and then exit plans. So I'm not here to put down blockchain. It's just that for the government purposes at the time, blockchain was really not the most useful way to go. So we pivoted to what's called interoperability. And we wanted something that prevented vendor lock-in. And we noticed with the blockchain technologies, if we had gone with that, everybody who signed up would have to do blockchain. But we wanted something more open. So we moved towards these global standards that you see here, the verifiable credentials and the decentralized identifiers. And that really gave us a lot more flexibility, and is also able to do pretty much everything that blockchain can do, but it leaves everything interoperable so that you're creating a communications layer. Now, decentralized identifiers, I'm going to start with that, or DIDs, are really just a unique ID number, but they're powerful because they have what's called a public-private pairing. So if Bryan and I are on network A together, and then I float over to network B and Bryan follows me, he could recognize me wherever I go. But what he can't do is steal my persona, because I have a private and encrypted key that only I own that proves that I am who I am. So anybody who tries to emulate that will fail. And already, just in that description, you can start to see how valuable something like this is in the world of global supply chains, being able to properly identify somebody in that manner. And then we have what's called verifiable credentials. I'm going to describe that in two ways. Credentials are the way, they're digital credentials, but they're a way in which we transport the data across from system to system. But the way that I want you to think about them is really as if they were a badge. And, just to alliterate this, if I was driving and Bryan was a police officer and he pulled me over because I was speeding, obviously when he asked me for identification, I'm not just going to show him an ID number. I'm going to show him my driver's license. And what he's going to do is he's going to look through that driver's license and he's going to notice that I match those attributes. The big problem here is that I may have given Bryan a fraudulent ID card. And he wouldn't just know that by looking at my driver's license. So he would have to go back to his car. And in the US, they call it the Department of Motor Vehicles. I don't know what they call it in Australia. But he would run that to make sure that that is really an active license and it's assigned to the name that it's supposed to have. And that is what the credentials do. The credentials, when they come in, can actually bring you back to the source who generated that. So if you think about it in terms of people, if I declare that I am Vincent Annunziato, you might think that that's pretty legitimate. But if I also have a passport, a driver's license, and I'm able to show you that those offices gave me credentials, especially in an automated fashion, that I am who I am, now my legitimacy, my credibility rises, all right, in the eyes of who's looking at that. And if you take that one step further, this is all happening in milliseconds through automation. All right. And that is an extreme change from what we have today. Now, if you were to look at this in the world of corporations, I'll use one other example, which I think is very helpful. In the old days, folks would want a money launderer, so they would go out to, I believe it was Cyprus, and they would set up these, they would buy these off-the-shelf businesses that existed for, $15, $20, whatever it costs them to incorporate and buy that name. And then they start a company and just start banking the next day, and they looked legitimate. Well, with this type of system, if you think about it, if we were able to track and see where somebody incorporated, and then we were able to see that they had a 15-year-old off the shelf name of a business or idea of a business, and then they start banking the next day, we might be more suspect. And those are the kinds of things that can happen. The other thing that I want to bring up while I'm on this slide is the difference between a first-party attestation and a third-party attestation, which I've already described, but I want to make sure that I illuminate this for you so that I can get you to understand it properly. A first-party attestation, in the terminologies that I was just using, is my self-declaration, not as powerful as a third-party declaration. And when you start to think about all the different third-party certifications that can be out there, from governments, for instance, verifying that somebody deserves AEO benefits, authorized economic operator benefits, right, with another country. Or if there was an examination done in one country and it doesn't need to be done in another one. Or if there's a company out there, or I should say an auditing company out there that is certifying that a product or even a corporation met a certain standard, green trade, for instance, or a standard that maybe says that a product is certified UL listing for legitimacy so that when you plug it in, you're not going to burn your house down. These are all things that make it much more difficult for the bad guys to prove that they're doing the right thing. And the more of these things that are added, that more hoops they have to jump through, the more difficult it becomes. Now, I don't want you to think that in the way that the government's going to add 25 things to make your life difficult. These are things that are already going on in the world today, all right? I'm going to skip through this slide, but I'm just really going to say very briefly, we've already started testing, and the first two pieces that we did are pipeline oil and steel imports. I'll be talking about that in a second. And then the other three that are coming up in 2024 is pipeline gas, food safety, and e-commerce. Now, 2023, August of 2023, which just passed, we did a big test. We had all of the major players for pipeline oil from Canada. We had the 95% of the top producers of oil there. And then down in Mexico, we did steel. The oil, what's amazing about this is that with oil, we could have it sell 25 times over the open industry exchanges, and we're still able to get back to the origin of that oil. And that's very important for US. In fact, the poor operators that are working on pipeline oil right now get mounds and mounds of paper, and sometimes they don't even get it until 2 weeks after the goods have been imported. It makes their job very, very difficult. All of the stuff that we're doing now is coming in pre-arrival, and it's coming in near real time, and we're getting it from each actor that's responsible for their end of the supply chain. So we're getting traditional as well as non-traditional actors. That's actually called a digital twin, right? Because we want to answer the questions of who's in control, what is it, and where is it geographically located, and we want to mimic the physical things that are going on in the supply chain. So the digital twin allows us to do that. You'll see some things on here. Again, I can't spend too much time because I want to get to the questions and discussion period. But we did things like an intent to import, which is very new, which means that the importer is going to be volunteering their supply chain information to us. And it's also creating what's called a workflow ID. So the beginning of a shipment's life cycle allows us to tie everything in from this new data. And then in our test, we mix that in with the old data that we're getting with ACE. That was the biggest experiment that we did this time, is how do we take all of this new data and mix it in with our entry system? And that went very successfully. By the way, on the steel piece, before I forget to tell you about this, the steel piece, the folks down in Mexico were really excited about this because they have other countries coming in to kind of try and undercut them with their steel costs and give potentially poor quality goods, for slightly less money. So what are companies going to be attracted to? Well, if you know anything about what's been going on in the U.S., we had some major things go on. We had a bridge fall not too long ago, and then 2 apartment buildings in Florida. would have been nice to know that the grade is actual, right? That they didn't use something that shouldn't have been. Anyway, so just something to relate to that. We also did something called a multimodal bill of lading, which was really interesting. And that allows us, because of the way we're taking in data, if you think of a kite and a tail, the kite being the actual product and the tail being everything that happens to it, it doesn't matter to us now what mode of transportation comes in, just that the final mode of transportation is captured for entry purposes. In the new world, we're going to be able to use this, I think, a lot more efficiently than now. And I will talk to you about CTPAT and AEO in just a little bit. So that's 2023. In 2024, we're taking on 3 new pieces, e-commerce, food safety, and natural gas. We're also doing some stuff for green trade. We have standards organizations like GS1 that does like the GTIN, which allows us to get really discrete information about products. And if you're working on the government side, you know, getting past handwritten descriptions and HTS codes to what it actually is at a retail level, I think is a fantastic upgrade. Glyph, you know, we're looking at locations and company verification. So those are third-party attestations. We have some big companies joining us, and we also have other agencies joining us. And as I mentioned earlier, I did the first single window. So we're getting another bite of the apple, me and my chief architect. And we think, this is me speaking, not the agency speaking, but I think I can get data redundancy down by some ridiculous amount, like almost 30–40%, based on what we're doing. Just as a side note, we have been getting bipartisan support across the board from Congress. We receive funding from them. That's what's actually driving the 2024 test. And we may even be getting funding this coming year, 2024, as well. So there's a lot of excitement around the government for what we're doing. What this piece will do is something that we haven't been able to do from the first test, which is where the system will actually be able to, instead of using our companies that we hire to do development for us, having them do the verifications, the government itself will do the verifications back to origin. It will also be able to issue credentials, which is very exciting and something that we're hoping to do with Australia, believe it or not, with the Border 5 group that we've been talking to. So we really believe that next year is going to be very telling for the path forward, ultimately setting up our technology stack going into what's called ACE 2.0. We have a number of different things that are coming down the pike. One is that post 2024 and post international testing, we're looking to get limited production on the steel and pipeline oil piece that we just did moving. So it will go live in our ACE system in 2025. We're looking to get funding for that right now. And we think we have a good chance of that going forward. And potentially even some of the CTPAT work that I'm going to be talking about. So really exciting. We even have a marketing plan, Bryan, with that's first ever that we're doing that is going to probably, we'll have about 5 different press releases going out. We have joint press releases going on with companies, with other governments and other agencies. So it's going to be a pretty big deal going into 2024. The international tests, now these could be 2024, 2025. There's 3 of them. So I'm going to start the furthest to the right. The global government-to-government data exchange piece is something that we're setting up for mutual recognition arrangement agreements that are between the Border 5 countries. And we'll be able to exchange that data back and forth to set up accounts and approve companies to get benefits without having to go through the process that we currently have right now, which I am ashamed to admit is an Excel spreadsheet. But there is a bigger view of this. Eventually, we believe that this is going to turn into an international communication system for all countries, not just those with MRA. So we're experimenting there. This is uniquely tied into the global automated economic operator credential. It's actually called the Global CTPAT AEO credential. And I will actually show you that today. And what that does is it basically gives a credential for an issuing country. So if you're the origin of that credential, and you send that to another country, that country will then be able to see on the cargo transactions themselves that that this company is certified. So in the long run of this, it may be that we don't even have to do the account structure anymore. We can just rely on the certifications coming from other countries, and then we just decide whether or not we're going to institute the benefits in real time. So that is really exciting, and each company can carry that credential in their digital wallet and expose it to whoever they need to. Just really quick, this is not done by any means. In fact, I can tell you right off the bat, we're missing one of our data elements, which is where I'm demanding that we put in a photo of whoever is carrying that. So we're going to issue a credential that would be coming from, if it was coming from Australia, there would be some kind of insignia so that you would know that you're getting the facilitation program from Australia with their logo on it. But if you look at what we're doing here, if you look at lines 1 and 2, you'll see that we're designating what country this is being issued by, and then the agency. And what's really good about this is that we have a scenario where CBP, US CBP, may be working with another agency like Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And if that's the case, now we can issue these credentials from both CBP and from FDA. Now, what we don't know right now is, will it be CBP issuing on behalf of the FDA, or will FDA actually issue that from theirs as well? So we are allowing for that future where there could be multiple agencies for different types of products that might be issuing these credentials, and all a company has to do is store it in their wallet and expose it when they want benefits. Obviously, the company information I don't need to go over with you, but we also included an affiliation type where there's a parent and subordinate. So just like Walmart, for instance, if you had a Walmart headquarters and then it's using that credential and wants to use it for its logistics portion of Walmart or its distribution, it could simply make sure that that's listed so that we have that and we know that it's been extended to Walmart. If you look at number 9, in the future, this could actually go away, but what we're using is a transition right now so that we have tax ID numbers or something that ties it to our legacy system. The last 3 may also not be needed. We're having discussions on this, but the status of where a company is, in this program, are they pending, approved, revoked, or suspended? We would be able to see that right away. Now, in the credentialing system, the reason why I'm saying this can go away is if we went back to the source and the country was saying that there was a problem with this, we would know immediately once we verified it that there was an issue. So these things are still under discussion, the certification date, and then the latest recertification date. Really, that's account level data. And what I'm trying to do now is drive the thought patterns to not look at how things are done today, but how things should be looked at tomorrow. So you may see some changes in the future on something like this. Ultimately, what the credentials and the DIDs are going to do is I already went over this digital twin, but allowing governments to get the data earlier in the process as companies are receiving them benefits not just the government, by the way, but the private sector as well. There are probably some large companies right now that are doing this that shouldn't have an issue with being able to track things in the way that we're asking. But some of the smaller and medium range companies, I don't think are there yet. This system will actually put that in place with them because we're really getting the data supplied to us at the same time that the private sector is getting them. The earlier data submissions mean we could be more proactive, much better data quality when you're building a transparent supply chain, knowing something from beginning to end, who all the players are, where the movements are, is much better than what we have today. And my goodness, we haven't even talked about artificial intelligence and what it can do for that. The interoperability simply means that you can pretty much generate this code from any type of system, maybe not a mainframe system, but even mobile, You think smart electronics would also be, smart devices could be used. It really allows you, even down to the farmer who's maybe has a cell phone, satellite technology can do that. And then those third-party attestations, which I mentioned, or verifications, are just irreplaceable. The system is global. I don't believe that we're building just a US system now. I believe that other countries will come on board with this. We will be so unified in our standards that I think if we were really serious about an international single window, we could do it for a transnational company, an international company that is moving goods between them by submitting data into one area. And that might be something maybe I do after I retire, is work on how do we get an international single window. Another piece, just to throw out there, and I'm almost done, but the systems in and of itself, what we're building right now, are multilingual. So there's never a problem with translation, even for countries that don't speak native English. That can be data mapped. And the penultimate of what we're trying to accomplish really is legitimizing the good versus the bad, so that we know when companies and products coming in, what's good, and then we can focus our operations on the areas that are suffering, for whatever reason that happens to be, or if we think something nefarious is going on. On top of that, I believe the private sector will ultimately benefit from that as well, both in their business and because of what customs is doing. We have a facilitation focus. We want to push legitimate companies through because that's what keeps our economy strong, legitimate products through. So everything that we're building right now is to move product as quickly as possible without sacrificing safety. And in this case, I think it actually enhances it. Ultimately, reaching what we call end-to-end interoperability, so that what you'll have is a network or a series of networks that are working almost like a neurological pulse system, where information is coming in and we can make fast decisions. So that ultimately is everything. I hope that was understandable. Let me stop my sharing. And all right. Am I back in full?
You are. So thank you very much. You've given us an awful lot of stuff very quickly.
A bit of a fire hose, I'm sure.
In the audience, please use the Q&A function. As I said before, if you've got anything you'd like to raise, as we go through now a conversation for the next 30 minutes, roughly. Vinny, a lot of stuff. Can I just bring you back, I suppose, to the process itself? Does the United States have an attitude of continuous improvement in its systems, and how you're overcoming the embedded legacy as opposed to thinking about this new future, process, and all the embedded investment that's gone on before, as opposed to, well, that's now redundant if we can get this new stuff going, that culture.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we went the direction we did with the interoperability and the specifications and standards is that when I made that statement about allowing technology choice, that is also for our benefit, right? So it really future-proofs our systems because it's that layer. So yes, we are on a constant state of modernization. The thing is, though, that we are doing what's called right now ACE 2.0, and that is supposed to be coming online probably more like 2026 for funding purposes and legislative purposes. Because I don't know if you've heard of 21st Century Framework, which is opening up our laws to allow us to take the data in earlier from non-traditional actors and use it for cargo purposes over just targeting purposes. So things like that are coming along. But, ultimately, what we want to do right now is set these foundations. And even if you look at what I'm doing in the testing, we're baby stepping in. I didn't set up the technology to do the verifications in the beginning. All we wanted to do was really see how this new data would be integrated with a very complicated system, And what we did was we linked the data in so that an operator can actually go, and once they get the entry or a bill and they see that there's attached data, they can go in and actually hit that link and they can see everything. And what it gets rid of is the snail mail processes and requests for more information processes, because everything is supplied up front, and it's consistent, and it's done the same way across the board. So that's been great. The reason that we have 2024 going, Bryan, is because the technology stack, we want to make sure that we're making the right decisions on how we upgrade. For all I know, we could use a small piece of blockchain in there, and I'm not certainly aware of what's going on. But the technology folks need to test all of this to make sure that they can keep our speed, they can handle the volume, all of that going forward. So I think we're taking a really smart approach. It is continual modernization, both on the technology, but also on the processes. That's something we had an AC assistant commissioner that recently retired, and he was really tough because he had a military background, and he was very, very good at acquisition. And my deputy and myself gave a presentation to him, and I was waiting to get, raked over the coals over something. And you know what he did? He turned around and he said, this is really good. This is the first time that we're really going with a business focus first. What are the business needs? And that's what really has changed. When I did the last ACE, we did what's called a lift and shift. We took it from one system and put it onto another one. And it had its own set of, issues. In fact, I like to say that when I was on that job, everything that went wrong was my fault, and everything went right was everybody else's. It was one of those situations. But this time around, we started with that business case first, the modernization view of what we'd like to do, which is get this complete picture of the supply chain so that we can respond properly. And that's where it's leading us to. That was a very long-winded answer.
No, that's great. One of the things which I've been interested in around this is, so we talk about the trades as the trade in goods, but very often before the goods are exchanged, the businesses have done commercial contracts. The banks have been involved with financing. The logistics people have already got all of their information. How are you seeing those processes? I noticed you had bills of lading as sort of a base fundamental piece in there. So the financial sector, how are you involving the financial sector in this to follow the money before you follow the goods?
So I don't believe in the beginning stages we're going to be able to get down to that level yet. I think that is something that will come through further legislation and as people become more comfortable with what the system can do. It is certainly on my radar, and I think it should be done. The problem is the laws don't allow for us to go and start pulling that information, except under circumstances where we're actually starting to do investigations. So how that will tie in, the banking industry in and of itself did a lot of work in the blockchain world, and these VCs and these DIDs really lend themselves well. So we could see communications coming from the banking system in the future once the agency decides to pursue that. Laws allow that. I'm certainly sure as Congress begins to catch on what the applicability is in that area. Just to pivot just a little bit, I am working with right now with Vancouver in Canada, one of the local governments who just started issuing credentials themselves with the mines. So one of the things that isn't really something that people consider in the supply chain, and I had mentioned this kind of briefly in the presentation about green trade, is that this system is so powerful eventually that as you start rolling in through the supply chain, if you need to make connections into your domestic as well, you can, because these credentials are like a baton. They can be passed off. So you can follow a product as it's being handed off and it's going through whatever it is. We were talking to Green Trade about something, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but circular economies. And how do we do circular economy? Well, customs could play a pivotal role in something like that. When something's being imported, are we reusing it? Are we able to track it? So, if companies are willing and able to do that, we would actually be able to give credibility to whatever that is that company's doing. So there's a lot of expanse here. And I mentioned even smart devices. We haven't really built that in, but smart devices would easily lend itself well into what we're doing. So if you want to make sure a refrigerated item is never dropped below a certain, temperature, and you have access to that kind of signal coming in when it hits your shores, or there's satellite on a ship, we can certainly have alerts going off that something's been tampered with or something is not going right with a product. That is on the horizon as well. So I think there's a lot of different avenues that you could see us expand into once we get the baseline of the system in. But the first thing is we got to get the supply chain right. And that's where I'm working right now.
So some of what you put up a particular slide with the 13 or number of attributes, which you were looking at, but one of those was, how do you use existing identifiers, and some of which was the tax system, for example. And again, going to my money example, is the global tax system identifies companies because they operate in different jurisdictions. They pay taxes in different jurisdictions. You want to be able to follow those things. So is that the sort of thing you have in mind? And do you have any experience with the World Customs Organization proposal around a trader ID? And is this, what you're talking about, is that what they're thinking of, or is there different thoughts here?
So I have had some interaction with the WCO, especially in describing what we're doing with the supply chain work. I would be fine with an international trader ID. I would like to see it turned into a credential so it could be carried around the digital wallet. I mean, any ID really can be done at that level. But one of the reasons that we're working with GS1 and Glyph, for instance, is because of their role in these global ID numbers, right? So the business indicators, that show location and companies and product information is invaluable. So any number of these things can be incorporated into this system. The problem that we have right now, I don't know if too many people are willing to say this, but in certain circumstances, ID numbers can be used even for companies that don't have those ID numbers. In this system, that would never work because you're always getting back to the source and the issuer. So if somebody issued a credential to somebody, you can't simply take that ID number and say, "Ha, I got it." You would get caught. And I think that again is another instance of really being able to tighten up on the supply chain and secure it properly. It's somewhat facetious, my story about that person that had their lips super glued together. I mean, I feel horrible for that person having that happen. But when I say, like lipstick in the haystack, the reason why I am talking about that is that credentials in and of themselves in the e-commerce world could be passed down to the consumer. And if you can give that power to the consumer, you're also initiating what I term, it's my own term, soft law enforcement. Because we have a generation right now that is really very interested in doing the right thing. They want to buy the right products. They want it to be genuine. They're interested in knowing where things have come from. I mean, I don't know how much your viewers might be interested in Starbucks, but they have a great little thing that they do where you scan the cup and you know what farm it came from, the coffee beans. And people love that stuff. And I think the social consciousness of folks trying to make sure that they are getting the products that they want to support, and safely doing so, it's irreplaceable, and it's revolutionary. And I think we need to be thinking along those lines. So anyway, I just wanted to draw that out.
No, I think it's an excellent example, and the same type of example applies to those businesses that buy inputs into their things and turn it into something or other else. Is, as you said, they don't want it to be of substandard. They, don't want it to be contraband. They don't want it to be subject to sanctions, either. So that consumer empowerment is a good That's a nice way to think about it, I think.
Yeah, and think about COVID, by the way, COVID-19, right? With all that we just went through, making sure, you know, if people or any type of pharmaceutical or any type of even supplements, if you're buying stuff on the open internet, there are people dying because they're getting poisoned by fentanyl, right? They don't know what they're getting, and they're thinking they're buying some cheap knockoff version that's going to, you know, help them get better. Well, now you would know in that case that you're not getting something, or you could be highly suspect of it. So I think it's just going to strengthen the economies. I'm sorry, Bryan, were you going to ask me a question?
I'll ask you more, but it's good getting all of the stuff. I want to return to the Border 5 concept, and that you're working internationally on these things, and Australia is part of that. You mentioned a number of trials which you're trying to do, and natural gas is one of them. Australia is a natural gas supplier. The United States is a natural gas supplier as well. So are there, you know, views around what it is you want to trial with Australia at the moment that our private sector might be interested in knowing about? We
Yeah,
obviously have critical minerals, you know, a whole range of things where traceability is going to become increasingly important.
I'm very limited right now in what I can do. So the two tests, in fact, I think I forgot to mention one of them was the my export is your import piece. But the global AEOCT PAT is really big for us because one is it gives the Australian companies that want to get benefits to other MRA countries the ability to do that in a very economic and concise way. On top of that, I'm hoping at some point that those badges can be viewed by even consumers to show that that the governments have actually certified them. On top of that, the my export is your import is, I don't know if your constituency would be familiar with drawback, but sometimes when a commodity comes into the US and it can't be sold and they want to move it to another country, or maybe part of it sold and not selling the rest of it, or maybe they got a better deal, whatever it happens to be, they'll ship it, they'll export it out. Well, they don't want to pay duties on that anymore. They want to get their duties back. So that's called drawback. Well, the problem right now is customs organizations don't have a great way of verifying that something is actually exported, right? So if we can get countries to say, hey, your export actually imported over here, and then I'd like to build in a second piece, which is even if somebody did an examination, they found out the goods weren't what they were stated to be, they would be able to inform us as well. So that when somebody makes a claim on drawback, we're able to verify that those goods actually went where they said they were. Because right now, somebody could conceivably cancel an order, and it'd take us a lot to figure out that it didn't actually ship. And there's a lot of legwork going on there. So that's another piece. There is potential. I'm not quite sure how the money is going to work in 2024, or if we're getting money, but if we do get money, there may be some more that we can do, but on the testing level. But the bigger thing for me is by 2025 is to get a couple of these pieces into limited production. Obviously, the companies that we're working with are trying to commercialize, so we have a responsibility to them and help them be successful. But once the steel piece and the oil piece go in, it opens the door for the other three. So if natural gas, and you're a major exporter of natural gas, comes in after that test, and we're able to go late 25, 26, conceivably, we would be able to open up and talk to Australia about how they can work with us on that as well. And certainly as we go forward with ACE 2.0, we would like other countries to begin their modernization process using the standards that we're now talking about around the world, to tighten that up so that the more countries that become involved, the more powerful the system becomes. So we think it's just going to be, I think it's just going to be a boom for the supply chain and businesses, probably as we come into some hard economic times over the next couple of years. But I think it's going to help really stabilize the supply chain industry. So that's just my personal view.
Excellent. you mentioned as we were setting up, as well as you thought, there's a no cost proposal. In this is things don't have to cost, well, what I like to term the submarine budget, in order to get stuff done. What are you thinking about there?
So let me, with the governments, we have three options that we're trying to propose so that the other governments can play even if they don't have budget to do so. So the first option is if if a government wants to get involved with what we're doing and they want to understand how credentials, issuing them, and how to securely verify them works, and they want to build something out, they can do that, right? So that would be the most expensive option, and it gives you the most influence into what we are doing, okay? Because when we're setting up that stage, everybody that is a part of it has a say. The second option is that you use a tool where we float code over to you, which is not as good as option one, but it still gives you a chance to build something out, get your technical folks involved, and get to see that credentialing process. It's not as, I don't think there's much cost in that other than your development costs, but you don't have to do much else other than that. And we would give you the code. But the third option is certainly for a country that would be struggling maybe with even getting a development team together. And we have cohort companies that I work very closely with DHS Science and Technology Directorate. They're the ones that actually got us into blockchain and then switching over to the global standards as we've done. They're the technical arm of what I do. In fact, Anil John, if you ever want to have him on, is brilliant. You can, in a sense, take one of the cohort companies and log into their system and trade credentials with us by simply just logging on. And you would be able to get your business folks to use the system and see what it is that we're doing and really get a good feel for the power of the tests that we're trying to perform and what they ultimately will give you. And also, because these companies are a bit more mature, because we've been working with them, they already have decent screens. So it really gives you a good feel for what you could potentially build. On top of that, it opens up doors for those companies to potentially work with the other governments if they would like to hire them in at some point, either to have them come in as a consultant or as even a developer. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in that realm. I've been putting a full court press on everybody right now. I think we're very close to the UK signing with us. I think we'll find out by December, I believe it's December 13th, how much they're going to participate in. And they're very, very interested in definitely the credential for sure. Going back and forth, I think they're very close with the my exports, your import, and now they're looking at the G2G. So we should get answers on that. From the folks I've been dealing with in Australia, it sounds to me like we're very close as well. But I really want to get something in writing so that I can say going into 24, we're set, and then start looking at where to schedule it so that the countries can be ready by a particular date. It doesn't have to be 24 because I have what's called 3-year money, and it can go into 25. So it would either be last quarter 24 or first quarter 25, depending on how the development teams and the structure works out with the other governments that we're working with. And one other thing I'll throw in, we're not just working with the Border 5. We're now looking at working with IDB Bank, who is working with South American and Latin American countries. So we may be exchanging some credentials with them as well, because we just want to get a full worldwide view of what's going on here, because it's that big.
Oh, that's great, because that was going to be my next question is, so the Border 5 is a limited group of countries. Do you have engagement or discussions going on with Europe as a grouping of countries, or even the developing countries, or the UN ACITI system, for example, which is adopted by a lot of countries?
Nothing with the UN right now. I would love, we have a relationship with the EU that I think I got to talk to Anil John about, because we're looking to see if we can bring them in as well. they're also working on very similar activities to what we're doing. So I think it would lend itself well. I'd also like to, I've been on a couple of webinars with the folks over in Singapore, and I would love to get Singapore involved as well. I had met with South Korea not too long ago. There's a lot of industry interest in what we're doing, especially from the pharmaceutical companies, which is why I brought them up. But I have to solidify my baseline. My baseline is going to be Border 5 first priority. And then whatever I get after that, of course, is just going to be what we would term gravy, right? So I do think there is potential for a lot of pile-on with this. The tests aren't meant to be extremely complicated. They're meant to be simple to just prove things. But the ramifications are so positive going forward. And I really think that if a country is really interested in modernization, they should pay close attention to what we're doing and join forces with us. Maybe even join the international working group over at the W3C, World Wide Web, as a participant with us. We're in there with some big companies, Mozilla, I think Google's there, certainly Microsoft, IBM, and there's even some talk, I don't know if this will happen, but there's even some talk that we may want to open up a technical forum for U.S. Customs there to discuss what we're doing with our modernization in the international working groups, because what will happen at some point is, even if we're in standards groups and we start going out with the modernization effort, at some point we may have to get out ahead of those organizations in order for us to fulfill the mission and make sure that the standards are set up correctly, and then come back to the standards groups with what we're doing. So there is that aspect of it. But I got to tell you, having been in this business for so long, this is just an unbelievable stage in my career to be at that international, the agency level, the domestic level with the other agencies, looking at green trade. I work a bit with forced labor as well. All of this stuff now, and seeing a baseline system that I think can improve just about everything it touches. It's just incredible for me, Bryan, and I'm hoping to do it, a great deal of justice in the next year or two.
Oh, that's excellent and exciting. Can I just ask you, just so we've got it covered off, China is, of course, the largest trading partner of many, many countries around the world. Are you interacting with China on this, or the supply chains that go through China? Australia sells iron ore and coal to China. They make the steel that presumably others buy. How are you thinking of China and or Taiwan in this, plan?
The global plan, the reason why it's so powerful is what it does is it sets up a standard across, all the countries, so that it's a level playing field. Believe it or not, I think it was last year. Yeah, I would say 2022. The Chinese embassy reached out through International Affairs to talk to me about what we were doing. We're a little bit more of in an infancy stage then. So there was some discussion there. They're not my primary motivator right now, because really what I'm trying to do is prove out the systems that we have. But certainly I've been on a number of ASEAN, conferences that they have attended, so they are aware of what's going on. We would like to see, all the major countries get involved eventually with this. There is going to be a transition period. It's not all going to happen at once. So we're going to have the legacy way of doing things. So there's going to be some ramp up time once we start getting into ACE 2.0. But as we start to turn over and we're more and more successful, we hope more and more countries will join us. So, like I said, if we are able to get a worldwide view and people are willing to share the proper information, I think it will strengthen everybody, private sector, governments, economies, all of it. I really do feel personally that this could be just a major revolution in the way we do business. And I think it's going to have a profound effect across the board. So that's about the best I can tell you.
Oh, look, and we're right on time, so that's been fantastic. It's a great spot to end this conversation. But the commercial links and the societal links between the United States and Australia are very deep, and I'm certain that this is something where there'd be a welcoming cohort in Australia who'd like to continue conversations with you, and some of those companies will be involved with the work you're trying to do already. So I'm certain if there was an opportunity for some sort of mirror activity that you know, we'd find a group pretty easily that want to be involved with that. So look, thank you very much for your time. We might have to have a nil on next year, maybe, when, you know, if we continue our series on. But thank you very much, Vincent, for your time. It's been really excellent. Thank you to audience who've stayed with us on the time. Next week, we actually have a session with Contexa around artificial intelligence and informed decision-making associated with that, contextual decision-making. So that'll be pretty interesting as well. But thank you, Vincent. Thank you to the audience. Good night, Vincent. And
All right, thanks for having me on.
Terrific. Thank you.